The story of the Viking peoples begins not with the sound of a raid, but with the quiet murmur of a homeland during the pre-Viking Iron Age of Scandinavia. This period, spanning from approximately 500 BCE to 800 CE, reveals a highly sophisticated material culture and intricate social structures long before the famous raids on Europe commenced. Archaeological records from bog finds, runic stones, and the elaborate burial mounds that dot the landscape from Denmark to Norway provide a comprehensive picture of a society that was both complex and deeply rooted in its environment. Excavations have uncovered a rich tapestry of material goods that challenge the image of a primitive, unorganized people. Bog finds, in particular, have preserved wooden artifacts, textiles, and even entire ships, offering invaluable insights into technological and cultural practices. The Hjortspring boat from Denmark, dating to the 4th century BCE, demonstrates early but advanced shipbuilding techniques, a precursor to the longships that would follow. Similarly, the numerous runic stones provide direct evidence of a written language, revealing a society capable of commemorating its leaders and events in a permanent, deliberate fashion. These runic inscriptions, often found on memorial stones and artifacts, speak of a social order defined by powerful chieftains, or jarls, and a warrior elite. But how did they learn their revolutionary shipbuilding technique that allowed the Vikings to dominate both the high seas and the shallowest rivers? Why did Vikings establish a broad trade route to the Islamic Caliphate? And what was the most precious material they were bringing back to Scandinavia? Why did they introduce an early democratic legal system that existed alongside the Viking warlords? And how did it function? The burial mounds of Scandinavia, particularly those from the Vendel and Valgärde periods in Sweden, showcase a clear social stratification. These elite graves contain not just the deceased, but a wealth of grave goods that detail their status. Ornate helmets, weapons with intricate patterns, chainmail, and finely crafted drinking horns. The presence of these items indicates a society with a powerful, wealthy aristocracy whose authority was based on military prowess and economic control. The longhouses, whose foundations have been discovered in settlement excavations, were the social and economic heart of these communities, housing extended families and their livestock, and serving as centers for craft production and communal life. The socio-economic foundation of these societies was a blend of agriculture, hunting, and fishing, all dictated by the diverse environmental conditions of the Scandinavian peninsula. The fertile lands of Denmark and southern Sweden supported a primarily agricultural economy, with communities organized around large farms and a network of trade routes. In contrast, the rugged coastlines of Norway fostered a population of skilled seafarers and fishers, whose social and political structures were shaped by the fjords and islands they inhabited. Just a quick announcement: if you enjoy this video so far, please subscribe to our channel, as it motivates us to bring you a new story every evening. This is the only kind request tonight, and we won't bother you with it anymore until the very end of today's story. Let's get back to the video. Early trade networks, reaching as far as the Roman Empire, also played a crucial role. The abundance of Roman coins and imported goods in graves and hoards demonstrates that these Germanic tribes were not isolated, but were active participants in a broader European economy long before the start of the Viking Age. These pre-Viking Germanic tribes, shaped by their environment and defined by a hierarchical warrior culture, laid the foundational elements that would later give rise to the great age of Viking expansion and conquest. The true enabler of Viking expansion, however, was a technological marvel: the longship. Before the Great Raids, there was a centuries-long evolution of Nordic shipbuilding that culminated in the highly adaptable and seaworthy vessels that would redefine European maritime capabilities. This development can be traced through archaeological finds that reveal an ongoing process of innovation. Earlier vessels, like the Hjortspring boat, were built with the shell-first method and were primarily oar-powered, designed for coastal travel and riverine warfare. Over time, these designs were refined, leading to the construction of more robust, flexible hulls and the eventual integration of sails. The key to the longship's success was its innovative clinker-built construction. This method, where overlapping planks of wood were riveted together, created a hull that was both strong and incredibly flexible. The oak was split along its grain to retain its natural strength, and the planks were then fastened together with iron rivets, a process that allowed the ship to flex with the waves rather than resist them, making it exceptionally seaworthy in the open ocean. This meticulous craftsmanship, which is evident in the preserved vessels from Oseberg and Gokstad, highlights the specialized skill of Viking shipwrights. The Gokstad ship, dating to the late 9th century, showcases the longship's mature design with its broad beam and deep keel, designed for ocean voyages. In contrast, the shallower drafted Oseberg ship, from an earlier period, was likely intended for coastal travel and as a royal burial vessel. The versatility of the longship was its greatest asset. Its shallow draft, often less than a meter, allowed it to navigate the shallowest rivers, surprise coastal settlements, and be beached with ease. This design enabled Viking raiders to penetrate deep into the heart of continental Europe, far beyond the reach of conventional European navies. While primarily propelled by sail for long-distance travel, the longship was also equipped with oars, providing the capacity for rapid maneuvering and swift, quiet approach during raids. The mast could be easily raised and lowered, allowing for quick transitions from sail power to oar power. The selection of timber was equally critical. Oak was preferred for the hull planks and keel due to its strength and durability, while lighter, more flexible woods like pine and ash were used for the upper parts of the vessel. The combined ingenuity of these design principles created a craft that was a perfect synthesis of speed, power, and adaptability, providing the crucial technological foundation for all future Viking expansion. The spiritual world of the pre-Viking peoples was a complex and vibrant cosmos, a polytheistic religion that deeply influenced their social and political structures. This pantheon was headed by Odin, the god of wisdom, war, and death, who presided over Asgard. Other key deities included Thor, the god of thunder and protector of humanity, and Freyja, the goddess of love, beauty, and war. The cosmos was a world of 9 realms, with Midgard, the human world, at its center, connected by the world tree Yggdrasil. The beliefs and practices of this faith, known as Norse paganism, were not codified in a single sacred text, but were transmitted orally through epic poems, sagas, and myths. Pagan religious practices were decentralized and often focused on localized worship. There was no single, unified priesthood, but rather a system of local chieftains, or jarls, who often served as ritual leaders, or godi. This close relationship between political and religious authority meant that the worship of gods was intrinsically linked to social order and military power. The great halls and sacred groves served as centers for ritual, which often involved sacrifice or blot to honor the gods and seek their favor. Archaeological evidence from sites like Upokra in Sweden, a major cultic center, reveals a sophisticated ceremonial culture with evidence of ritual feasting and the deposition of votive offerings. Bog finds, such as the famous sacrifices at the Gudme site in Denmark, provide physical evidence of these practices, with deliberately broken weapons and human remains offered to the gods in exchange for victory and prosperity. The worship of war gods like Odin and Tyr provided a direct cultural framework for the martial prowess that would later define the Viking Age. The concept of a glorious death in battle, leading to a place in Odin's Hall of Valhalla, served as a powerful motivator for warriors. This belief system valorized courage, honor, and loyalty, creating a social and ideological foundation for military expansion. The veneration of ancestors and a strong belief in fate, or word, also played a crucial role, providing a sense of historical continuity and fatalistic courage that was well suited for a life of raiding and exploration. The myths and rituals of Norse paganism, far from being a simple superstition, were a sophisticated system that reinforced the social hierarchies and martial values of a culture on the cusp of an age of unprecedented expansion. It was a cosmos that prepared a people for conquest, providing a divine justification for a life of violence and adventure that would soon be unleashed upon the world. Viking society was fundamentally shaped by its unique political and legal institutions, which existed in a state of creative tension between democratic participation and aristocratic rule. At the heart of this system was the Thing, a popular assembly where free men, from landowning farmers to powerful chieftains, gathered to settle disputes, make legal judgments, and decide on matters of communal importance. These assemblies were not simply democratic forums, but were crucial to the functioning of Viking society, as they provided a legal framework for a people with no centralized government. Runic inscriptions and sagas provide evidence of these assemblies, which could range from local gatherings to regional or even national parliaments, such as the Althing in Iceland. The location of these assemblies, often in open fields or on sacred hills, reinforced their connection to the land and the community. The authority of the Thing was balanced by the power of the Jarl, a powerful aristocratic chieftain whose influence rested on both personal charisma and military success. A Jarl's position was not solely hereditary. It had to be earned and maintained through a combination of wealth, land ownership, and the ability to command a loyal retinue of warriors, or huskarls. The relationship between a Jarl and his followers was one of mutual obligation. The Jarl provided protection, resources, and opportunities for plunder, while his followers offered military service and unwavering loyalty. This hierarchical structure was essential for organizing large-scale raids and military campaigns, as it provided a clear chain of command and a system for distributing the spoils of war. The existence of these two power centers, the collective authority of the Thing and the individual might of the Jarl, created a political system that was simultaneously fiercely independent and deeply hierarchical. The legal and social codes that emerged from this system were also unique. While there were no written laws in the modern sense, legal principles were memorized and recited by a lugso gumadur, or law speaker, who was elected to preside over the Thing. The focus of Viking law was often on restitution and compensation rather than retribution, with fines, or wight, paid for crimes ranging from assault to murder. This system was designed to prevent blood feuds from escalating, and it demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of social conflict resolution. The influence of this legal framework would persist even after the Christianization of Scandinavia, with elements of Viking law being incorporated into the legal codes of medieval kingdoms like England's Danelaw. The tension between the collective voice of the free farmers and the autocratic rule of the warlord Jarl was a dynamic force that provided the political foundation for both the internal stability and the external expansion that would characterize the Viking Age. It was a system that, in its unique balance of power, was perfectly suited for a society defined by both communal responsibility and individual ambition. The first contacts between Scandinavian peoples and the settled kingdoms of Europe were not always violent. They were often characterized by extensive trade networks that preceded the raids. This exchange of goods and ideas across the North Sea and the Baltic provides crucial context for understanding the Viking Age, demonstrating that Scandinavian peoples were not unknown to Europe even before their famous raids began. Archaeological evidence from major trading centers like Birka in Sweden, Hedeby in Denmark, and Kaupang in Norway reveals a cosmopolitan culture with a flow of goods that linked the Baltic region with the Frankish and Anglo-Saxon realms. These sites were not simply markets, but highly organized settlements with specialized craftsmen, administrative structures, and connections to far-flung trade routes that spanned from the British Isles to the Byzantine Empire. The primary exports from Scandinavia were valuable commodities from the northern wilderness, including amber from the Baltic coast, furs from the vast northern forests, and slaves captured from rival tribes or internal conflicts. In return, Scandinavian merchants acquired luxury goods, silver, and weapons from the more developed economies of continental Europe. The abundance of silver coinage, particularly dirhams from the Abbasid Caliphate and deniers from the Frankish Empire, found in Viking hordes across Scandinavia, provides tangible proof of this extensive commerce. This flow of silver was not merely for economic transaction. It was also a sign of a chieftain's wealth and prestige, used for gifts and as a source of political power. Cultural exchanges also occurred along these frontiers, long before the raids of the late 8th century. Frankish and Anglo-Saxon chroniclers were aware of the Germanic tribes of the north, and their accounts, while often hostile, provide some of the earliest written information about Scandinavian society. These texts, combined with runic inscriptions that show a knowledge of Roman letters and Christian symbols, demonstrate that the pagan North was not a world apart, but was deeply aware of its Christian neighbors. The influence of Christian art is also visible in some Scandinavian artifacts from this period, suggesting a flow of artistic and religious ideas that preceded formal conversion. The Frankish and Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, for their part, established a series of defensive frontiers to manage their relationship with the Scandinavians. The Carolingian Empire, for example, maintained a series of fortified ports and naval bases along the coast to regulate trade and prevent small-scale incursions. King Offa of Mercia, in the 8th century, established a network of defensive mounds, or offa, to manage his frontier with the Welsh, a practice that was a reflection of the security concerns of the era. The presence of these defensive measures, even before the Viking Age, demonstrates that the threat of seaborne raiders was not a new phenomenon, and that the peoples of Europe were not entirely unprepared for what was to come. These extensive commercial and cultural connections, which preceded the raids, demonstrate that the Viking Age was not a sudden, unpredictable event, but a historical culmination of centuries of interaction and exchange between the North and the settled kingdoms of Europe. Following the symbolic raid on Lindisfarne, the raids intensified, and the pattern of early Viking expansion became more defined and widespread. This period, from the late 8th to the mid-9th century, was characterized by small, opportunistic warbands that targeted the wealthy but undefended coastal settlements and monasteries of the British Isles and the Frankish Empire. The initial raids were not part of a coordinated invasion, but rather a series of decentralized, profitable enterprises launched by independent chieftains. The success of these early incursions was a direct result of several factors, including the Vikings' superior naval technology and their ability to exploit the political and military vulnerabilities of their targets. The primary motivations behind these early raids were a combination of economic necessity and the pursuit of personal glory. Scandinavian society, particularly in Norway, was characterized by a system of partible inheritance, where a chieftain's wealth and land were divided among his sons. This practice created a class of ambitious, landless men who had to seek their fortune elsewhere. Raiding offered a direct and efficient way to acquire wealth in the form of silver, gold, and valuable goods sand to gain the reputation and prestige necessary to establish a powerful retinue or even a chieftainship in a new land. The acquisition of slaves was also a significant economic driver, as captives were a valuable commodity in the slave markets of Dublin and the Eastern European river systems. The targets of these raids were carefully chosen for their wealth and lack of defense. Monasteries, in particular, were ideal targets. As centers of religious life, they held a vast amount of portable wealth in the form of gold and silver liturgical objects, jeweled crosses, and finely crafted manuscripts. Crucially, they were also unfortified, and their communities of monks were unarmed, making them easy prey for a swift surprise attack. The longship's shallow draft allowed the raiders to navigate rivers and strike deep inland, bypassing the coastal defenses that were largely designed to repel conventional naval assaults. The speed and mobility of these warbands meant that by the time a local lord or king could organize a military response, the Vikings were already gone. The political fragmentation of the British Isles and the Frankish Empire also played a key role in the success of the early raids. In England, the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were often at war with one another, making a unified defense impossible. Similarly, in the Frankish Empire, the death of Charlemagne led to a series of succession disputes that left the empire politically weak and militarily distracted. These internal conflicts meant that the Vikings faced little coordinated resistance and were often able to use political rivalries to their advantage, accepting tribute or mercenaries from one king to fight another. This era of decentralized, opportunistic raids laid the groundwork for a far more significant transformation. It demonstrated that a new power was afoot in the North Atlantic, a power that had the technology and the motivation to fundamentally alter the political landscape of Europe. The vengeful sea was not just a metaphor. It was a highway of opportunity that carried the ambition and violence of the Viking world to the shores of their wealthy neighbors. The character of Viking warfare underwent a dramatic transformation in the mid-9th century with the emergence of the Great Heathen Army. This was not a loose coalition of opportunistic raiders, but a massive and coordinated military force that moved beyond mere plunder to systematic conquest and territorial occupation. First arriving in East Anglia in 865 CE, this army operated on a scale previously unseen in Viking history. Its logistical and organizational achievements allowed it to sustain a multi-year campaign of conquest across Anglo-Saxon England, a feat that earlier, smaller warbands were incapable of. The army's core leadership included prominent figures from the sagas, such as Ivar the Boneless and Halfdan Ragnarsson, whose strategic vision and ability to command a diverse coalition of warriors were crucial to its success. Unlike the hit-and-run tactics of the previous decades, the Great Heathen Army's strategy was to establish permanent bases and operate year-round. The army's first winter camp was established in East Anglia, a clear break from the seasonal raiding patterns of the past. The army's movements were not random, but were aimed at systematically dismantling the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. By 867 CE, they had captured the city of York and seized control of the kingdom of Northumbria. The army's strategy involved the establishment of fortified camps, or burhs, which were often Roman ruins or repurposed Anglo-Saxon fortifications. These camps served as a secure winter quarters and as logistical hubs for their campaigns. The use of these fortified positions demonstrates a sophisticated military understanding of territorial control and defensive strategy. The army's success was also enabled by its logistical achievements. The sheer size of the force, which contemporary estimates place in the thousands, required a constant flow of supplies. The army was able to sustain itself in part by demanding tribute payments, known as danageld, from conquered kingdoms, and in part by foraging and seizing resources. The army's ability to operate deep inland was a testament to its organizational capacity as it moved on horseback, not just in ships. This gave them a speed and mobility that outmatched the Anglo-Saxons, which were often tied to their local territories. The campaigns of the great heathen army led to the collapse of the kingdoms of Northumbria, East Anglia, and Mercia, leaving only Wessex, under the command of King Alfred, to resist. The army's ultimate objective was not just to seize wealth, but to establish a new Viking kingdom in England, a goal that represents a fundamental shift in the character of Viking expansion. This era marked the transition from opportunistic piracy to organized state building, a transformation that would permanently alter the political and cultural landscape of the British Isles. The arrival of the great heathen army turned England into a prolonged battlefield, a crucible that forged a new political reality. The army's objective, unlike earlier raids, was not simply to plunder, but to systematically conquer and occupy the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. The campaigns of its leaders, including the legendary Ivar the Boneless and Halfdan Ragnarsson, demonstrated a strategic military vision that overwhelmed the fragmented Anglo-Saxon resistance. In 867 CE, the Vikings captured the city of York, a key political and economic centre, and seized control of the Kingdom of Northumbria. They then proceeded to conquer East Anglia, killing its king, Edmund, in 869 CE. The Kingdom of Mercia was also subjugated, its royal family forced to flee and its territory divided. By 871 CE, all of the major Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, save one, had fallen to the Viking force. The fierce resistance to the Viking conquest came from a unified Wessex under the command of King Alfred the Great. Alfred, recognizing the existential threat posed by the great heathen army, transformed the military and political structures of his kingdom to meet the challenge. He engaged in a combination of open field battles and strategic negotiations, often paying Danegeld to buy time and peace. Alfred's military genius lay in his ability to adapt to Viking tactics. Instead of relying on a single large army, he developed a mobile defensive strategy that involved a system of fortified towns, or burhs, and a standing army of professional soldiers. These burhs, strategically placed to control key roads and river crossings, served as both defensive strongholds and centers for military recruitment. The military tactics of both sides were a direct reflection of their strategic objectives. The Vikings, operating as a sustained military force, were masters of siege warfare and the construction of fortified camps. Their ability to use rivers and horses to move quickly across the landscape gave them a mobility that often outmatched the Anglo-Saxons. Alfred's forces, on the other hand, relied on disciplined shield wall formations and a coordinated defensive network. His campaigns, such as the famous victory at the Battle of Edington in 878 CE, were a testament to the effectiveness of a unified, long-term military strategy. This pivotal battle, which led to a negotiated peace, marked the turning point in the struggle for England. The long, bloody campaigns of the great heathen army had effectively dismantled the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. But in doing so, they had inadvertently created a unified resistance. England's crucible, in the end, forged not a single Viking kingdom, but the foundations of a new, unified Anglo-Saxon identity. The outcome of the struggle in England was a negotiated peace that fundamentally altered the country's political geography. The pivotal event was the Treaty of Wedmore, concluded in 878 CEK, after King Alfred's decisive victory over the great heathen army at the Battle of Edington. The treaty's terms were a reflection of the military stalemate. Alfred and the Viking leader Guthrum agreed to a division of England. The southern and western territories, including the Kingdom of Wessex, remained under Anglo-Saxon control, while the eastern half was to be governed by Viking law and custom. This territory, which stretched from the River Thames to the River Tees, became known as the Danelaw. The establishment of the Danelaw was not merely a territorial division, but the birth of a new political and cultural entity. Within this region, Viking chieftains settled as landowners and farmers, establishing a new aristocracy and a new social order. The archaeological record provides ample evidence of this settlement, with place names of Scandinavian origin, such as those ending in by farm or thorp village, still dotting the map of eastern England. The presence of Viking-style graves, weaponry and jewellery also demonstrates a significant Norse presence that integrated with the existing Anglo-Saxon population. The cultural synthesis that occurred within the Danelaw was profound. Norse legal traditions, which were memorized and upheld at local assemblies called wapentakes, blended with existing Anglo-Saxon law. This legal framework emphasized the rights of free landowners and often provided a more direct and efficient form of justice than the complex, hierarchical system of the Anglo-Saxons. The linguistic impact was also significant. Old Norse, the language of the Viking settlers, intermingled with Old English, leading to the introduction of hundreds of words related to daily life, law, and administration. Words such as law, skill, take, and give all have Scandinavian origins, and their integration into the English language provides a permanent linguistic legacy of the Danelaw. Economically, the Danelaw became a hub of trade and commerce. The Viking settlers, drawing on their long-standing connections to Scandinavian and Irish trading networks, revitalized old Roman roads and established new markets, or corpangs. Major centres like York, which had become the Viking capital of Northumbria, flourished as cosmopolitan ports that connected the British Isles with the wider Viking world. This period of political division and cultural integration laid the foundational elements for a new, unified kingdom of England that would eventually emerge from the struggles of the 10th century. The Danelaw, born from a negotiated peace, was a testament to the fact that Viking expansion was not just about conquest, but about the creation of new societies and a permanent alteration of the European political and cultural landscape. The rivers of continental Europe became the primary highways for Viking raiders, turning the Frankish Empire into a prolonged arena of conflict. From the mid-9th to the early 10th century, Viking longships, with their shallow drafts, navigated the Rhine, Seine, Loire, and Garonne rivers, enabling a systematic plunder of the empire's wealthy hinterlands. These incursions were not isolated events, but a series of devastating, multi-year campaigns that exposed the deep political and military weaknesses of the Carolingian Empire. Frankish chroniclers of the period, such as the Annales Bertiniani, provide a grim record of the destruction, detailing the sacking of cities, the burning of monasteries, and the abduction of countless people for ransom or enslavement. The motivations of these raiders were similar to their Anglo-Saxon counterparts, the acquisition of silver and valuable goods. However, the scale of the Frankish raids was often larger and more destructive. The Vikings' ability to sail deep inland meant that they could target cities that were considered safe, such as Cologne and even Paris. The siege of Paris in 885,886 CE stands as a testament to both Viking military prowess and the vulnerability of the Frankish kingdom. A massive Viking fleet of hundreds of longships sailed up the Seine, laying siege to the city for over a year. The defenders, led by Count Odo of Paris, put up a fierce resistance, but the empire's response was slow and uncoordinated, ultimately forcing a humiliating truce and the payment of a massive sum of Danegeld. The Viking aggression on the continent was enabled by the political fragmentation of the Carolingian Empire following the death of Charlemagne. The Treaty of Verdun in 843 CE had divided the empire among his grandsons, leading to decades of internal succession disputes and civil wars. This political disunity meant that a coordinated, unified defense against the seaborne raids was virtually impossible. Frankish kings were often more concerned with fighting one another than with repelling the Viking threat, and they frequently paid the raiders to attack their rivals, a policy that only strengthened the Vikings' position. The empire's naval defences were also severely lacking, as the Carolingian military was primarily organised for land-based warfare. This deficiency allowed Viking fleets to operate with impunity along the coasts and rivers, establishing fortified bases and using the waterways as strategic arteries for their campaigns. The long-term impact of these raids on the Frankish Empire was profound. They not only drained the empire's wealth through tribute and plunder, but also contributed to its political and social decay. The constant threat of attack led to the decentralization of power, as local counts and lords were forced to take on the responsibility of defense. This decentralization was a key factor in the emergence of a new feudal political order. The raids also led to the eventual establishment of a permanent Viking settlement in Normandy, a region that would later become a powerful force in European politics. The Frankish agony, in the end, was a direct result of a new kind of warfare and a deep-seated political instability that left the empire unable to defend its shores and its soul from the Viking onslaught. Ireland, with its decentralized political structure and numerous monastic centers, proved to be particularly vulnerable to Viking raids, which began in the late 8th century. Unlike England and the Frankish Empire, Ireland had no single unified kingdom. Instead, its political landscape was a mosaic of rival petty kingdoms, a fragmentation that the Vikings expertly exploited. The monastic communities, serving as centers of learning and wealth but lacking military defenses, were ideal targets. Early raids, similar to those in England, were opportunistic and seasonal, designed to secure silver, gold, and slaves. The longships' shallow drafts allowed raiders to penetrate deep inland via the extensive river systems, bringing the threat of attack to communities far from the coast. However, the character of the Viking presence in Ireland underwent a significant transformation in the mid-9th century. The raiding parties began establishing permanent coastal bases, known as Longfortsa, Norse Gaelic term for ship harbour. These fortified harbours served as secure winter quarters and as logistical hubs for more sustained raiding campaigns. The first of these long forts, established in 841 CE, would eventually grow into the city of Dublin. Other long forts, such as those at Waterford and Limerick, also evolved into permanent settlements and eventually into the first Viking kingdoms on the Irish coast. These fortified towns provided the Vikings with a secure base of operations and a permanent foothold in Ireland. The founding of these Viking kingdoms fundamentally altered the political dynamics of Ireland. The Norse-ruled port cities of Dublin, Waterford, and Limerick became centres of a burgeoning slave trade, with captives from both Ireland and the British Isles being sold in the markets of the wider Viking world. These cities also served as hubs for a lucrative international trade in goods, connecting the Irish economy with the commercial networks of Scandinavia, the Frankish Empire, and the Byzantine world. The Viking kingdom's military power, based on a professional force of warriors and a fleet of longships, provided a new and powerful element in the complex political landscape of Ireland. The relationship between the Viking settlers and the native Irish kings was a complex mix of warfare, alliance, and cultural exchange. While the Irish kings initially united to fight the Viking threat, this unity was often short-lived. Viking chieftains frequently allied with one Irish king to fight another, offering mercenary services in exchange for land and tribute. The sagas and Irish annals, while chronicling the brutality of the raids, also record numerous instances of intermarriage between Norse and Irish nobles, and the adoption of Irish Christian names by Viking leaders. This cultural synthesis laid the groundwork for the emergence of a new people, the Hiberno-Norse, who blended Viking martial prowess and commercial acumen with native Irish traditions. The Viking kingdoms of Ireland, born from opportunistic raids, eventually became a permanent and powerful force that shaped the country's political, economic, and cultural development for centuries to come. The Irish Viking kingdoms developed a unique and powerful culture that synthesized Norse and Gaelic traditions, giving rise to a new people. The Hiberno-Norse. This cultural blend was not a passive process, but an active and dynamic fusion of two distinct societies. The Viking settlers, who had initially arrived as raiders, transformed into permanent urban dwellers, bringing with them a sophisticated understanding of commerce, seafaring, and military organization. This new Hiberno-Norse society was centered on the fortified port cities of Dublin, Waterford, and Limerick, which became hubs for trade and political power. Archaeological evidence from Viking Age Dublin, particularly the extensive excavations at Wood Quay, provides a detailed picture of a thriving, cosmopolitan port city. The excavations have revealed a dense network of streets, workshops, and houses, showcasing a robust economy based on craft production and international trade. Craftsmen produced a wide range of goods, from finely carved bone and antler items to metalwork and textiles, many of which were exported throughout the Viking world and beyond. The city's harbour, a bustling commercial centre, was a crucial link in a vast trade network that connected Ireland with Scandinavia, the Frankish Empire, and the Byzantine world. The discovery of silver dirhams from the Islamic Caliphate and other foreign coins in Dublin's hoards provides tangible proof of this extensive international commerce. The Hiberno-Norse culture was also a synthesis of Norse pagan and Irish Christian traditions. While the Viking settlers initially maintained their pagan beliefs, they gradually adopted Christianity, often for political and social reasons. However, this was not a simple conversion, but a process of blending tradition. Norse art, with its intricate animal motifs and interlaced patterns, was adapted to Christian themes, as seen on the carved stone crosses of the period. Norse legal traditions, which were upheld in the Viking towns, also existed alongside the native Irish law codes, creating a dual legal system that reflected the multicultural nature of the society. The Hiberno-Norse kings, who ruled from their strongholds in Dublin, were not just Viking chieftains, but a new type of ruler. They blended Norse martial prowess and naval power with the political institutions of the native Irish. These kings, such as Olaf Gothfridsson, issued their own coinage and established diplomatic and military alliances with both Norse and Irish rulers. Their power, however, was always in a state of flux, as they constantly fought against rival Irish kings and faced internal succession disputes. The emergence of the Hiberno-Norse as a people and a culture demonstrates the complex and transformative legacy of the Viking presence in Ireland, where raiders eventually became permanent settlers who reshaped the country's political and cultural development for centuries to come. The Western Isles, Orkney and Shetland, became vital stepping stones for Viking expansion into the Atlantic, a process that transformed these islands into a vibrant and enduring part of the Viking world. This Norse presence was not a series of raids, but a systematic and sustained settlement that began in the late 8th and early 9th centuries. The island groups, with their proximity to the Scandinavian coast, served as a natural progression for migrants from Norway who were seeking new lands for farming and settlement. These islands offered fertile agricultural land and rich fishing grounds, making them attractive to a population experiencing increasing political centralization and land scarcity in their homeland. The Norse settlement of the Scottish Islands, particularly in Orkney and Shetland, was a process of both displacement and cultural blending. Archaeological evidence from sites like Jarlshof in Shetland reveals a clear stratigraphic sequence, with Norse longhouses built directly on top of older Pictish settlements. This indicates a direct replacement of the local population, although it is likely that some Pictish peoples were assimilated through intermarriage. The settlement patterns in these areas show a distinct Norse influence, with farms and villages organized according to Scandinavian models. The place names, such as those ending in Bista Farm or Dal Valley, also provide strong linguistic evidence of a Norse presence. The Norse settlers established powerful chieftainships in the islands, which were often a result of their own political struggles and the desire to escape the authority of the Norwegian king Harald Fairhair. The earldom of Orkney, in particular, became a significant political force, ruling over a large part of the Scottish Islands and maintaining a degree of independence from both Norway and Scotland. The Orkney Inga saga, a medieval Icelandic text, provides a detailed, if often mythological, account of these powerful Jarls and their campaigns of conquest and political maneuvering. The Jarls of Orkney were not only rulers, but also prominent military leaders who led raids and commanded fleets throughout the North Atlantic. The cultural and genetic legacy of this Norse presence is still evident today. Genetic studies have shown a strong Scandinavian lineage in the populations of Orkney, Shetland, and the Western Isles, providing a biological link to the Viking settlers. The cultural synthesis that occurred on these islands, however, was also significant. Norse language and law, while dominant, coexisted with elements of Pictish and Gaelic culture, creating a unique hybrid society. The presence of Norse art, runes, and burial practices on the islands demonstrates a continuity with Scandinavian culture, but the adoption of local resources and adaptation to the island environment also shows a degree of cultural change. These island communities, born from a period of migration and conquest, became a vibrant part of the Viking world, serving as naval bases, trading hubs, and political centers that shaped the history of the North Atlantic for centuries to come. One of the most significant and lasting Viking settlements occurred on the European mainland, leading to the founding of the Duchy of Normandy. This chapter tells the story of Rollo, a Norse chieftain whose actions would have a profound impact on European history. By the late 9th and early 10th centuries, the Frankish Empire, weakened by political fragmentation and a lack of a unified naval defense, was suffering from a sustained period of Viking raids on its heartlands. The Seine Valley in particular was a primary target for Viking fleets, which used the river as a highway to strike at wealthy inland cities. The Viking leader Rollo, whose origins are debated by historians but are believed to be Norwegian or Danish, was a prominent figure in these devastating raids on the Frankish kingdom. His success as a military leader and the scale of his campaigns became a significant threat to the Frankish monarchy. In 911 CE, the Frankish king, Charles the Simple, unable to defeat the Vikings militarily, adopted a pragmatic policy of negotiation. The result was the Treaty of Saint-Clair-sur-Epte, a pivotal agreement that fundamentally altered the relationship between the Vikings and the Frankish monarchy. In exchange for the cessation of raids on his territories, Charles granted Rollo and his followers a large territory in northern France, a region that would become known as Normandy. The terms of the treaty required Rollo to accept Frankish suzerainty, convert to Christianity, and defend the mouth of the Seine from other Viking raiders. This act, while a humiliation for the Frankish monarchy, was a shrewd political move. Charles gained a powerful military buffer against future Viking attacks, while Rollo and his followers gained land, legal status, and a secure base for their operations. The establishment of the Duchy of Normandy initiated a rapid process of cultural assimilation. The Norse settlers, a minority population in a predominantly Frankish-speaking region, quickly adopted the French language, Frankish legal traditions, and Christianity. Rollo himself was baptized in 912 CE and took the Christian name Robert, a clear sign of his acceptance of the new political and religious order. However, the Norse settlers did not abandon their martial prowess or political ambition. They retained a distinct military and social identity, which blended their seafaring traditions with the cavalry-based warfare of their new Frankish neighbours. The Normans, as they came to be known, proved to be an exceptionally adaptable and ambitious people. Their new identity, forged in the crucible of this cultural synthesis, would become a powerful force in European politics. The founding of Normandy was one of the most significant and lasting Viking settlements on the European mainland, and it provided the foundational elements for a kingdom that would, in the following century, launch a conquest that would forever alter the history of England. As the raids on Europe began to diminish in the late 9th century, a new wave of Viking activity began, permanent migration to new unsettled lands. This shift was driven by a combination of factors, including increasing political centralization in Scandinavia, which led many independent chieftains to seek new lands to escape royal authority, and the economic opportunities presented by new territories. The discovery and settlement of Iceland represents a unique political experiment in this era, a commonwealth established by Norse chieftains and free farmers that was based on a code of law and a rejection of monarchy. The discovery of Iceland is traditionally attributed to the Norseman Nadod, who was blown off course while sailing to the Faroe Islands in the 9th century. However, the systematic settlement of the island began in the late 870s with a Norwegian chieftain named Ingolfur Arnason, widely regarded as the first permanent settler. According to the Icelandic sagas, the settlement was a direct response to increasing royal power in Norway under King Harald Fairhair. The sagas, while a mix of historical fact and literary narrative, provide a valuable account of this migration, detailing the reasons why many free farmers chose to leave their homeland to avoid submission to a centralized monarchy. The settlers, who were largely from the western coast of Norway, established a unique political system in their new homeland. Iceland had no king or centralized government. Instead, the country was governed by a commonwealth of powerful chieftains, or Gotha, who held both political and religious authority. These chieftains presided over a national assembly called the Althing, a legislative and judicial body that met annually in the summer. The Althing was a remarkable institution, serving as a national parliament where laws were made, legal disputes were settled, and a national identity was forged. The system was based on a legal code, memorized and recited by a single law speaker, or lögsogumaður, who presided over the assembly. The unique social structure that developed in Iceland was a direct reflection of its political system. The settlers, as free farmers, held a strong sense of personal liberty and communal responsibility. However, the harsh environment of the island, with its volcanic landscape and limited agricultural land, presented significant challenges. The settlers relied on a combination of farming, fishing, and sheep herding to survive, adapting their traditional Scandinavian practices to the new environment. This society, forged in isolation, developed a rich literary tradition in the form of the sagas and the Eddas, which preserved the history and mythology of the Norse world. Iceland's political experiment, based on a code of law and a rejection of monarchy, was a powerful and enduring legacy of the Viking Age. The search for new land pushed Viking explorers even further west, to a forbidding Arctic land that would become known as Greenland. This new wave of exploration was led by Erik Thorvaldsson, better known as Erik the Red. Born in Norway, Erik was an outlaw who was exiled from his homeland and then from Iceland for committing homicide. His banishment from Iceland in the late 970s CE led him to a land that had been glimpsed by earlier explorers. Erik's voyage of discovery took him to the southwestern coast of a massive icebound island. He spent 3 years exploring the region, and upon his return to Iceland, he he gave the new land the name Greenland, a strategic choice designed to attract potential settlers by making the land sound more hospitable than it was. The colonization of Greenland began around 985 CE, with a fleet of longships carrying hundreds of settlers from Iceland. The colony was divided into two main settlements: the eastern settlement, located near modern-day Qaqortoq, and the western settlement, situated further north near Nuuk. Archaeological evidence from these settlements, including the remains of longhouses, churches, and graves, provides a detailed picture of the challenges of survival in this forbidding environment. The settlers adapted their traditional Norse lifestyle to the Arctic conditions, relying on a combination of farming, hunting, and fishing. The farms, though smaller than those in Scandinavia, supported livestock, and the settlers hunted seals, walruses, and polar bears, which provided a crucial source of food, skins, and valuable trade goods like ivory. The social and political dynamics of the Greenland colony were a direct continuation of the Icelandic model. It was a small, isolated settlement that lacked a centralized monarchy and was instead governed by a commonwealth of chieftains. The colony was politically and economically dependent on Iceland and, to a lesser extent, on Norway through trade. Greenland's primary export was walrus ivory, which was a highly sought-after commodity in the markets of Europe. This sea trade was a critical lifeline for the colony, as it provided a way to acquire essential goods like iron and timber, which was scarce on the island. The colony's isolation, however, made it particularly vulnerable to external shocks, such as a decline in sea trade or a shift in climate. The fate of the Greenland colony, which eventually vanished in the 15th century, is a historical enigma that remains a subject of ongoing debate among scholars. The reasons for its disappearance are thought to be a combination of a cooling climate, a decline in trade, and increasing isolation. Greenland's edge, in the end, was a frontier of human endurance, a testament to the Viking spirit of exploration that pushed the boundaries of the known world to its northernmost limits. The ultimate frontier of Viking exploration was North America, a land that the Norse sagas refer to as Vinland. The discovery and subsequent attempts to settle this new territory are documented in two primary sources: the saga of Eric the Red and the saga of the Greenlanders. These texts, while a mix of oral tradition and historical memory, provide a remarkably consistent account of a historical event that has been corroborated by modern archaeological evidence. The initial sighting of North America is credited to Bjarni Herjolfsson, a Norse merchant who was blown off course while sailing to Greenland in the late 10th century. However, the first systematic exploration was undertaken by Leif Erikson, the son of Eric the Red, who purchased Bjarni's ship and retraced his voyage. Leif Erikson's expedition, around 1000 CE, led to the discovery of three new lands: Helluland, land of flat stones, which is believed to be modern-day Baffin Island; Markland, forest land, likely Labrador; and Vinland, a region with a more temperate climate where they found wild grapes and an abundance of salmon. The name Vinland is a subject of historical debate, as it could refer to either the presence of wild grapes or, more likely, a linguistic misunderstanding for meadowland or pasture land. Regardless of its origin, the name was a powerful symbol of the land's perceived bounty. Leif established a short-lived settlement at a place he called Leifsbudir, a base for further exploration. The most significant archaeological evidence for the Norse presence in North America comes from the site of Lance Aux Meadows on the northern tip of Newfoundland. Discovered in 1960, the site contains the remains of three large longhouses, a forge, and other structures that are unmistakably Norse in design and construction. The radiocarbon dating of the site places its occupation in the early 11th century, a period that aligns with the saga accounts of Leif's expedition. The discovery of a bronze ring-headed pin, a spindle whorl, and a soapstone bowl from the site provides tangible proof of a Norse presence and their craft production in North America. Lance Meadows, however, was not a permanent colony, but a temporary base camp for exploration and resource extraction. The eventual failure of the Norse settlement was due to a combination of factors, the most significant of which was conflict with the native peoples, whom the Norse referred to as Skraelings. The sagas document several violent clashes between the two groups, demonstrating a fundamental incompatibility between the Norse desire for settlement and the native people's defense of their territory. The Norse, though technologically superior in terms of weaponry, were a small, isolated group of settlers who could not sustain a prolonged conflict. The lack of sustained support from Greenland was also a contributing factor. The Greenland colony itself was a fragile settlement, and it could not spare the resources or the manpower to support a distant and dangerous new colony. The Vinland Saga, in the end, is not a story of conquest but of a remarkable discovery and a failed attempt at colonization, a testament to the adventurous spirit of the Vikings and the ultimate boundaries of their expansion. The political consolidation of Norway, under the leadership of chieftains like Harald Fairhair, marked a significant transformation in the Viking world. This process, which occurred in the late 9th century, was a direct response to the decentralized political landscape of pre-Viking Scandinavia, where power was held by numerous independent jarls and local kings. Harald Fairhair's unification campaign, as detailed in the sagas, was not a single event but a decades-long struggle to bring the smaller kingdoms of the fjords and valleys under a single rule. His ultimate victory, often mythologized in the sagas, established a new political order that had a profound impact on the future of Norway and Viking expansion. Harald's military strategy was based on a combination of naval power and land-based warfare. His command of a powerful fleet of longships gave him control over the sea lanes and fjords, which were the primary arteries of communication and trade in Norway. This naval supremacy allowed him to isolate and defeat his rivals one by one, culminating in his decisive victory at the Battle of Hafrsfjord, an event that is traditionally seen as the moment of Norway's unification. The battle, though a small-scale affair by modern standards, was a pivotal event that solidified Harald's rule over the coastal regions and established a new, centralized monarchy. The political strategies that led to this unification were equally important. Harald's rule was not based on a new legal code, but on the systematic application of a new political order. He demanded submission and loyalty from the defeated chieftains, often granting them land in exchange for military service and tribute. This feudal-like system, while a break from the more democratic tradition of the thing, provided a powerful foundation for a new centralized monarchy. The unification of Norway also had a significant impact on Viking expansion. Many of Harald's defeated opponents, unwilling to submit to his rule, chose to flee Norway and seek new lands in the North Atlantic. This emigration, which is documented in the Icelandic sagas, was a major factor in the Norse settlement of the Scottish Islands, Iceland, and Greenland. The unification of Norway, therefore, was not just a historical event in Scandinavia, but a key driver of Viking migration and a catalyst for the establishment of new Viking settlements throughout the Atlantic. The subsequent expansion of Norwegian influence into the North Atlantic was a direct consequence of this political centralization. The new Norwegian monarchy, now in control of a unified kingdom, sought to extend its power over the islands of the North Atlantic. The earldom of Orkney, in particular, became a vassal state of the Norwegian king, providing tribute and military service in exchange for royal protection and recognition. The consolidation of Norway under a single king, therefore, was not the end of the Viking Age, but a transformation of it. It was the moment when the decentralized world of independent chieftains was replaced by a new political order that would eventually become a powerful force in medieval European politics. While Norway's Viking activity was oriented westward, Sweden's was primarily eastward, leading to the establishment of a commercial empire in the Eastern European river systems. This expansion, which began in the 8th century, was driven not by the pursuit of conquest and settlement, but by a focus on commerce. The Swedes, known to the Slavs and Byzantines as the Rus, established trade outposts and riverine networks that linked Scandinavia with the rich markets of Byzantium and the Abbasid Caliphate. The primary artery of this vast commercial network was the Volga trade route, which connected the Baltic Sea to the Caspian Sea. The Swedes established fortified trading centers, or kaupangs, along this route, such as Staria Ladoga and Gnezdovo. These settlements were not just military bases, but bustling, cosmopolitan hubs of commerce where Scandinavian merchants exchanged furs, amber, and slaves for silver dirhams from the Caliphate and luxury goods from the Byzantine Empire. The archaeological evidence from these sites provides tangible proof of this extensive trade, with thousands of Islamic coins and other foreign artifacts unearthed in Viking hoards and graves. The presence of these coins, in particular, demonstrates the scale of the trade and the wealth that was flowing into Scandinavia. The Swedish expansion eastward also led to the establishment of a powerful state. The traditional origin story of the Kievan Rus, as detailed in the primary chronicle, attributes its founding to a group of Swedish Vikings, led by a chieftain named Rurik. According to the chronicle, the local Slavic tribes, suffering from internal strife, invited the Rus to come and rule over them, a narrative that has been a subject of historical debate. Regardless of the exact circumstances of its founding, the Kievan Rus was a confederation of Slavic and Norse peoples ruled by a dynasty of Viking descent. The cities of Novgorod and Kiev became the political and commercial centers of this new kingdom, controlling the lucrative trade routes that linked the Baltic to the Black Sea. The cultural and economic connections that linked Scandinavia to the rich markets of Byzantium and the Caliphate were not just a one-way flow of goods. Norse sagas and runic stones speak of Viking warriors who travelled to the east, serving as mercenaries in the Byzantine army or as traders in the markets of Baghdad. This exposure to a highly sophisticated and wealthy culture had a profound impact on the Swedish Vikings, who brought back not only silver and luxury goods, but also new ideas in art, religion, and governance. The Swedish trading empire, therefore, was not just a historical footnote, but a key driver of cultural exchange and state formation in Eastern Europe, a testament to the fact that Viking expansion was not always about conquest, but about the pursuit of wealth and commerce. The Varangian Guard was a legendary mercenary army whose story is a testament to the global reach of the Viking world. This elite military unit, composed primarily of Norsemen and other northern warriors, served the Byzantine emperors in Constantinople from the late 10th to the 14th centuries. The Guard's origins can be traced to the diplomatic and military relationship between the Byzantine Empire and the Kievan Rus. The Rus leaders, who were of Swedish Viking descent, often sent their best warriors to serve the emperor in Constantinople, a practice that was formalized in a series of treaties. These warriors, whom the Byzantines called the Varangoi from the Old Norse term varinga, meaning sworn companion, were initially a small group of mercenaries. The Varangian Guard's formal establishment as a permanent imperial unit is traditionally dated to 988 CE, when the Kievan Grand Prince Vladimir the Great converted to Orthodox Christianity and, in fulfillment of a treaty, sent 6,000 Varangian warriors to the Byzantine Emperor Basil II. Basil, who was facing a series of internal rebellions and military challenges, saw the value of a foreign bodyguard as these warriors had no local loyalties and were fiercely loyal to the emperor alone. The Varangian Guard quickly gained a reputation for its ferocity in battle, its unwavering loyalty, and its use of the battle axe, a weapon that became the unit's defining symbol. The Guard served as the emperor's personal bodyguard, and it was also deployed on the battlefield as a shock troop, a decisive force that could turn the tide of a battle. The reasons why Viking warriors journeyed to the east were a combination of economic opportunity and the pursuit of honor. The pay and spoils of war in Constantinople were far greater than what could be earned in Scandinavia or the British Isles. The Varangians were among the highest paid soldiers in the Byzantine military, and they also had the right to plunder the emperor's palace upon his death, a practice that, while legally sanctioned, was often a source of immense wealth. The journey to the east was also a way for young, ambitious warriors to earn fame and prestige, as a saga might tell. The service in the Guard provided a direct path to wealth and social mobility that was not always available in their homelands. The legacy of the Varangian Guard is a testament to the enduring impact of the Vikings on European history and culture. Runic stones in Scandinavia, known as Varangian runestones, commemorate warriors who died while serving in the Guard, providing tangible evidence of this transcontinental journey. The Guard's martial traditions and cultural influence also had a lasting impact on Byzantine culture, with Norsemen becoming an integral part of the imperial court. The Varangian Guard's vow of loyalty to the emperor, in the end, was a powerful symbol of a new era of Viking activity, one that moved beyond simple raiding and settlement to a role as a key player in the political and military affairs of the medieval world. Viking activity was not limited to the Christian world. It extended to the Islamic Caliphate, revealing a complex relationship of both trade and conflict. This transcontinental connection, primarily facilitated by Swedish Vikings or Ruses, demonstrates a focus on commerce over conquest in these eastern ventures. The Viking interaction with the Caliphate began in the late 8th century with the establishment of extensive trade networks that connected the Baltic Sea to the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea. These routes, known as the Volga trade route and the Dnieper trade route, were the primary arteries of this lucrative commerce. The main motivation for these eastern voyages was the acquisition of silver. The Viking world, lacking a significant source of its own silver, was hungry for coinage to fuel its economy and political system. The Islamic Caliphate, with its vast and wealthy economy, was a primary source of this silver. Archaeological evidence from Viking hordes across Scandinavia, particularly in Sweden and Gotland, contains thousands of silver dirhams from the Abbasid and Sasanian empires. The presence of these coins, some dating from the late 8th century, provides tangible proof of the extensive trade and the wealth that was flowing from the Caliphate into Scandinavia. The Vikings' interaction with the Islamic world was not always peaceful. The Norsemen, referred to by Islamic chroniclers as the Majs, fire worshippers, or the Ars, also engaged in raids on the Caliphate's territories. The raids on the Iberian Peninsula, particularly on the city of Seville in 844 CE, are well documented in Islamic and Frankish sources. These raids, while devastating, were generally short-lived and did not result in permanent settlement. However, Islamic chroniclers, such as Ibn Fadlan, provide vivid and detailed descriptions of the Rus traders they encountered on the Volga River, describing their customs, burial rituals, and material culture. Ibn Fadlan's account of a ship burial provides one of the most important primary sources for understanding Viking culture from a non-Norse perspective. The trade routes that connected the Norse world to the Muslim world were also a conduit for cultural exchange. Norse artifacts, such as weapons and jewelry, have been discovered in Caliphate territories, while Islamic-inspired art and motifs have been found on Scandinavian runestones and jewelry. The trade routes also provided the Vikings with access to new technologies and ideas, which they then adapted to their own needs. The long arm of the caliphate, in the end, was a powerful force that drew the Vikings eastward, not for conquest, but for commerce and the pursuit of a wealth that would fuel their economy and enhance their status in the Viking world. The zenith of Viking power in Ireland was met with a decisive and bloody reckoning at the Battle of Clontarf in 1014 CE. This pivotal battle, which is often mythologized as a final confrontation between the Vikings and the Irish, was in reality a complex political event that had been brewing for decades. The Irish king Brian Boru, who had unified much of Ireland under his rule, was attempting to assert his authority over the Hiberno-Norse kingdom of Dublin. The Dublin king, Sigtryg Silkbeard, in turn sought to form a powerful coalition to resist Brian's ambitions. The battle was therefore a clash, not just between the Irish and the Norse, but between competing Irish kings and their respective Viking allies. The forces at Clontarf were a mix of Norse and Irish warriors, all with their own political motivations. Brian Boru's army was composed of warriors from his own kingdom of Munster, as well as allies from other Irish provinces. The opposing force was a formidable coalition of Norsemen from Dublin, Orkney, and the Isle of Man, and a significant contingent of Irish rebels from the province of Leinster. The military tactics of both sides reflected their distinct warrior traditions. The Norsemen, with their long-standing reputation as elite warriors, fought with a disciplined shield wall formation, while the Irish warriors, with their more mobile and fluid tactics, relied on light infantry and guerrilla-style attacks. The battle itself, as described in the annals of Ulster and other Irish chronicles, was a brutal, all-day affair, fought in close quarters near the walls of Dublin. The battle ended in a tactical victory for Brian Boru's forces, but at a devastating cost. Brian Boru himself, despite not fighting in the battle, was killed in his tent by a retreating Norse warrior. The death of the Irish king, who was the architect of Irish unity, created a power vacuum that would have profound political consequences for the future of Ireland. The Viking forces, though defeated, were not annihilated. The city of Dublin remained under Norse control, and the Hiberno-Norse kingdoms of Waterford and Limerick continued to exist. The long-term political consequences of Clontarf were far more complex than the simple narrative of Irish victory suggests. While the battle marked the end of large-scale Viking invasions of Ireland, it did not lead to the expulsion of the Norse. The Hiberno-Norse kingdoms continued to exist for another century and a half, and they remained a powerful force in Irish politics and commerce. The battle's true legacy, therefore, was not the end of Viking power in Ireland, but the beginning of a new era of political fragmentation, where the gains made by Brian Boru's unification were lost in the chaos that followed his death. The echo of Clontarf, in the end, was not a roar of finality, but a complex mix of victory and loss that set the stage for a new political reality in Ireland. The Viking Age was not just one of violence and conquest, but also of remarkable artistic achievement, a creative legacy that endured long after the raids ceased. The distinctive art styles that developed from the 8th to the 11th centuries were a direct reflection of a culture that was in a constant state of flux, blending indigenous Norse traditions with new influences from the British Isles and continental Europe. These artistic traditions, which are primarily preserved in intricately carved wood, metalwork, and runic stones, were not static but evolved over time, reflecting changes in society and religion. One of the earliest and most intricate styles is the Oseberg style, dating to the early 9th century. Named after the royal burial ship discovered in Norway, this style is characterized by a swirling, serpentine interlace pattern that often depicts mythical beasts and human figures. The craftsmanship is highly detailed and dynamic, with the carving seemingly in a state of perpetual motion. The Oseberg ship itself, a masterpiece of wood carving, is a testament to the skill of Viking artisans. The art of this period was largely pagan in theme, with its animal motifs often representing the chaotic, natural forces of the Norse cosmos. This was followed by the gelling style, a more refined and formalized art form that emerged in Denmark in the mid-10th century. Named after the gelling stone commissioned by King Harald Bluetooth, this style features more defined animal figures, often with ribbon-like bodies and curled manes. The gelling style shows a clear progression from the earlier, more chaotic Oseberg art, with a greater emphasis on symmetry and a more controlled, almost formal aesthetic. The gelling stone itself is a powerful symbol of this transition, as it combines a Christian message with a pagan-style animal motif, bridging the gap between the old and new faiths. The Ringerike style, from the late 10th and early 11th centuries, represents a further evolution of this artistic tradition, characterized by its more dynamic animal motifs and a greater use of symmetrical leaf patterns. The Ringerike style is often seen on runestones and metalwork. The carvings of this period are more fluid and less chaotic than the earlier styles, reflecting a society that was becoming more settled and politically centralized. The Ernest style, which emerged in the late 11th century, was the final stage of Viking art. Named after the stave church in Norway, this style is characterized by its elongated, graceful animals and a more open, elegant interlace pattern. The Ernest style, with its Christian themes and more refined aesthetic, is often seen as a final, transitional art form that paved the way for the Romanesque art of the High Middle Ages. The enduring legacy of Viking art is a testament to the creative and cultural vitality of the Norse peoples. These art styles were not just decorative, but served a crucial social and political function, commemorating great deeds, honoring the dead, and reinforcing the social hierarchies of the Viking world. They also provide a visual record of a culture in transition, moving from a pagan, decentralized society to a Christianized, monarchical one. The Vikings, in the end, were not just warriors, but master craftsmen, whose artistic legacy continues to be a source of study and admiration. The most profound cultural transformation of the Viking Age was the adoption of Christianity, a gradual and often violent process that fundamentally reshaped Scandinavia. This Christianization was not a sudden event, but a slow transition that began with a series of missionary activities and diplomatic overtures in the 9th century, and was largely complete by the 11th century. The motivations behind these conversions were complex, blending political necessity, economic calculation, and genuine personal conviction. Early missionary efforts, such as those led by the Frankish monk Ansgar in the 9th century, had limited success. The initial contacts were often through the Vikings' extensive trading networks, where merchants and sailors encountered Christian ideas and symbols. However, the first significant conversions were often political in nature. As the Frankish and Anglo-Saxon kingdoms became more powerful, Scandinavian leaders recognized that, to trade and engage in diplomacy with their southern neighbors, they needed to be part of the Christian world. Christianity provided a common language of law and diplomacy that was essential for political integration into Europe. The conversion process was a slow and often violent one. In Denmark, King Harald Bluetooth's conversion in the mid-10th century, commemorated on the gelling stone, was a pivotal moment. The inscription on the stone explicitly states that Harald made the Danes Christian, a statement that reveals both his political authority and his use of Christianity as a tool for state building. In Norway, the conversion was largely the work of kings like Olaf Tryggvason and Olaf Haraldsson, who used a combination of missionary work and brutal force to enforce the new faith. The sagas chronicle a number of violent clashes between Christian kings and pagan chieftains, demonstrating the fierce resistance to a religion that threatened the traditional social and political order. The transition from a decentralized pagan society to a centralized Christian one was not a simple replacement of one belief system for another. Rather, it was a process of cultural blending. Norse paganism did not simply vanish, but was gradually absorbed into Christian belief and practice. This is evident in the art of the period, where pagan motifs, such as intricate animal interlace patterns, were adapted to Christian themes, as seen on carved stone crosses and church decorations. The conversion also brought literacy and a new legal framework to Scandinavia, as Christian clergy, who were often literate in Latin, played a key role in the administrative and legal systems of the new Christian kingdoms. The twilight of the northern gods, in the end, was not a moment of annihilation, but a long process of cultural and political transformation that prepared the Scandinavian kingdoms for their new role in medieval Europe. Olaf Tryggvason, a Christian king of Norway in the late 10th century, stands as a central figure in the Christianization of his kingdom. His conversion to Christianity was not a passive event, but a zealous and often violent campaign to spread the new faith throughout Norway. Unlike the more gradual conversion of Denmark, Norway's Christianization was largely driven by royal decree and military force. Olaf's story, as told in the sagas, is a complex blend of historical fact and literary embellishment, but it provides a clear picture of the motivations and methods of a Christian warrior king. Olaf's early life was spent as a raider and mercenary in the British Isles, where he was exposed to Christianity and was eventually baptized. His return to Norway in 995 CE was driven by a political ambition to unify the country under his rule and to bring it into the fold of Christian Europe. The sagas chronicle his campaigns of conversion, which often involved a combination of missionary work and brutal force. He would offer pagan chieftains a choice: convert to Christianity or face the full might of his army. This policy, while effective in the short term, created a deep-seated resistance from pagan leaders who saw Christianity as a threat to their traditional social and political power. The resistance to Olaf's Christianization efforts was fierce and prolonged. The pagan chieftains and farmers, who held power through a system of local assemblies, saw the new faith as a challenge to their autonomy and their long-standing religious traditions. The sagas record several instances of pagan rebellions and a number of prominent pagans who were executed for refusing to convert. The struggle between the old and new faiths was not just a religious conflict. It was a political struggle for control over Norway. The eventual consolidation of a Christian Norway was not achieved by Olaf alone. His reign, though significant, was ultimately cut short by his death at the Battle of Svolder in 1000 CE. However, his successors, particularly Olaf Haraldsson, later Saint Olaf, continued his work using similar methods of military conquest and political consolidation to finally bring Norway into the Christian world. The long-term legacy of Olaf Tryggvason's zeal was the consolidation of a centralized Christian monarchy in Norway. The new Christian kings, with the support of a new Christian clergy, were able to build a new administrative and legal system that was more powerful and unified than the decentralized system of the pagan Jarls. The establishment of a Christian Norway opened up new diplomatic and economic opportunities, allowing the kingdom to integrate into the wider Christian world. The conversion of Norway, in the end, was a testament to the power of a single, charismatic leader and the transformative potential of a new faith to fundamentally reshape the political and cultural landscape of a society. The conversion of Iceland to Christianity was a unique and largely peaceful event, a powerful testament to the Commonwealth's political maturity and its rejection of the violent religious wars that were sweeping across mainland Scandinavia. The process of Christianization in Iceland was not driven by military conquest, but by a political decision made at the Althing, the country's national assembly. This peaceful transition, which occurred around 1000 CE, contrasts sharply with the often brutal and prolonged conversions on the mainland, and is a direct reflection of the unique social and political dynamics of Icelandic society. The primary impetus for conversion came from the influence of Christian Norway under the rule of Olaf Tryggvason, who sent missionaries and used political pressure to encourage the Icelanders to abandon their pagan faith. The Icelandic people, who were in a state of political and religious conflict, were divided between those who wished to maintain their traditional pagan beliefs and those who saw Christianity as a way to integrate into the wider European world and secure a lucrative trade relationship with Norway. This religious strife threatened to erupt into a civil war, a conflict that the leaders of the Althing were determined to avoid. The decisive moment came at the Althing in 1000 CE, where the law speaker, Auger Ljósvetningagofi, a pagan himself, was tasked with mediating the dispute. After spending a day and a night in a state of meditation, he returned to the assembly and delivered a verdict that, in a stroke of political genius, satisfied both sides. He declared that all of Iceland would be Christian by law, but that the people could continue to practice pagan rituals in private as long as they did not do so in public. This compromise, known as the Conversion Compromise, prevented a civil war and allowed for a gradual, peaceful transition to the new faith. The conversion of Iceland, while a peaceful event, had profound and lasting consequences. It led to the development of a rich Christian literary tradition, as the Icelanders, who were already a highly literate society, began to record their history and mythology in Christian-influenced sagas. The sagas, such as the Saga of the Greenlanders and the Saga of Eric the Red, preserve invaluable information about the Viking Age, providing a unique perspective from a Christianized Norse society. The conversion also brought Iceland into the political and cultural sphere of Christian Europe, allowing it to maintain its independence while still participating in the international networks of the medieval world. The North Atlantic's Christian echo, in the end, was a testament to a unique political experiment that, in its peaceful transition to a new faith, preserved both the independence and the historical memory of the Viking world. The final great expression of Viking power was the creation of a vast multi-kingdom empire under the leadership of the Danish ruler Canute the Great. This empire, which stretched from the Baltic to the Atlantic, was forged through a combination of military conquest, political maneuvering, and a sophisticated understanding of a changing European political landscape. Canute's reign, which began in the early 11th century, represents a crucial period of transition, bridging the gap between the decentralized world of Viking raids and the centralized monarchies of medieval Europe. Canute's path to power began with his conquest of England in 1016 CE, a protracted military campaign that followed the death of his father, Sweyn Forkbeard. Canute's army, a formidable force of Danish and Norse warriors, was a professional military machine that outmatched the Anglo-Saxon defence. His victory over the English king Edmund Ironside at the Battle of Essendon secured his rule over England and established a new Danish dynasty. Canute's subsequent conquest of Norway in 1028 CE further expanded his empire as he defeated the Norwegian king Olaf Haraldsson and brought Norway under his rule. He also exerted a degree of control over parts of Sweden and the Scottish territories, creating a North Sea empire that was unprecedented in its scope. The political and military achievements that made this empire possible were a testament to Canute's strategic genius. He did not rule as a traditional Viking chieftain, but as a Christian king in the mold of the great European monarchs. He reconciled with the Catholic Church, made a pilgrimage to Rome, and issued laws that blended Anglo-Saxon and Danish legal traditions. Canute's rule was based on a system of administrative and legal control that was far more sophisticated than the decentralized structures of the early Viking Age. He maintained a strong professional army, or herd, and a powerful navy, or ladang, which allowed him to enforce his will across his vast territories. Canute's role in bridging the gap between the Viking world and Christian Europe was a crucial part of his legacy. His empire, a Christian kingdom ruled by a Viking dynasty, was a unique political entity that integrated the cultures and legal systems of two distinct worlds. His reign, therefore, was not a simple continuation of the Viking raids, but a transformation of them. It was the final great expression of Viking power, a moment when a Viking ruler commanded an empire that rivaled that of the great European monarchs. The end of Canute's North Sea Empire, which collapsed shortly after his death, was a testament to the fact that such a vast and complex political entity could only be held together by a ruler of exceptional ambition and skill. The rise of Canute's North Sea Empire was followed by its swift collapse, a political fragmentation that demonstrated the inherent instability of a multi-kingdom empire held together by a single ruler. The dissolution of Canute's empire began immediately after his death in 1035 CE, as rival claimants to the throne emerged in England, Denmark, and Norway. Canute had attempted to secure the succession through a series of marriage alliances and political appointments, but his death unleashed a torrent of succession disputes that his successors were unable to control. In England, the succession was contested by Canute's two sons, Harold Harefoot and Harthacnut. Their rivalry, fueled by ambitious noblemen and competing political factions, led to a period of political turmoil and civil war. The English nobility, who had resented Canute's foreign rule, used this opportunity to reassert their own power and influence. Harthacnut, who eventually secured the English throne, was a weak ruler who was more concerned with his Danish territories than with the governance of England. His death in 1042 CE marked the end of the Danish dynasty in England and the restoration of the Anglo-Saxon line, with the accession of Edward the Confessor. In Norway, Canute's empire was challenged by the return of Magnus, the son of the former Norwegian king Olaf Haraldsson. Magnus, with the support of the Norwegian nobility, successfully drove out Canute's son Sweyn and re-established a native Norwegian monarchy. This marked the end of Danish rule in Norway and the re-emergence of an independent Norwegian kingdom. The political fragmentation of the North Sea Empire was complete. The kingdom that Canute had forged through military conquest and political skill was quickly dismantled by the internal succession disputes and the powerful national identities of the peoples he had conquered. The collapse of Canute's empire demonstrates a key historical principle, that a multi-kingdom empire held together by a single ruler without a common political and cultural identity is inherently unstable. The separate legal traditions, political structures, and national loyalties of the English, Danes, and Norwegians were too strong to be subsumed into a single unified kingdom. Canute's reign, though a powerful expression of Viking ambition, was a historical anomaly that could not be sustained. The end of his kingdom, in the end, was a testament to the fact that while the Vikings could conquer and rule vast territories, the long-term project of state-building required more than just military might. It required a political and cultural unity that his empire, for all its size and power, could never achieve. The Norman conquest of England in 1066 CE represents the most enduring legacy of Viking expansion, a historical event that was a culmination of centuries of cultural synthesis and political ambition. This invasion, led by William the Conqueror, a descendant of the Viking chieftain Rollo, was not a sudden foreign conquest, but a clash between two societies that had been profoundly shaped by their Viking heritage. The Normans, though they had long since adopted the French language and Christianity, had retained a distinct martial prowess and political ambition that was a direct continuation of their Norse roots. The political circumstances that led to the invasion were a complex web of succession claims and diplomatic intrigue. The death of the childless English king Edward the Confessor in January 1066 created a power vacuum. The English succession was contested by three main claimants: Harold Godwinson, the most powerful earl in England, who was crowned king by the English council; Harold Hardrada, the king of Norway, who claimed the throne based on a dynastic agreement; and William, Duke of Normandy, who claimed the throne based on an alleged promise from Edward the Confessor. This succession crisis, which plunged England into civil war, provided William with the perfect opportunity to launch his invasion. The military invasion was a logistical and organizational masterpiece. William's army, a formidable force of Norman, Breton, and Flemish warriors, was a professional military machine that outmatched the Anglo-Saxon defense. William's naval force of hundreds of ships, though not longships, was a testament to the Norman mastery of the seas, a direct continuation of their Viking ancestry. The battle that decided the fate of England was the Battle of Hastings, a brutal, all-day affair that pitted the disciplined Anglo-Saxon shield wall against the combined forces of Norman cavalry and infantry. William's victory at Hastings and the subsequent death of Harold Godwinson secured his rule over England and established a new Norman dynasty. The lasting impact of Norman rule on English language, culture, and government was profound. The Normans, though they were a minority population, imposed a new aristocracy and a new political order on England. The English language, which had been developing for centuries, was infused with thousands of French and Latin words, a linguistic legacy that is still evident today. The Norman government, with its centralized feudal system and administrative efficiency, was a significant departure from the decentralized system of the Anglo-Saxons. The Domesday Book, a comprehensive survey of England commissioned by William, is a testament to the Normans' administrative power and their desire to consolidate their rule. The Norman conquest of England, in the end, was the final great act of Viking expansion, a historical event that, in its own unique way, brought the Viking Age to a decisive and permanent close. The traditional end of the Viking Age is a moment of both finality and myth-making. The Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066 CE. This pivotal battle, which occurred on September 25th, was a decisive moment in the English succession crisis that had followed the death of Edward the Confessor. The English king Harold Godwinson, who had just secured his throne, was faced with a dual invasion. The first invasion came from his own brother, Tostig, and Harold Hardrada, the king of Norway, who claimed the English throne based on a dynastic agreement with a previous English king. Harold Hardrada's invasion force, a formidable army of Norwegian and Icelandic warriors, landed in northern England and defeated the local English earls at the Battle of Fulford. This victory allowed the Norwegian army to capture the city of York and to demand tribute from its citizens. However, the Norwegian victory was short-lived. Harold Godwinson, with a speed that surprised his opponents, marched his army from the south of England to the north in just 5 days. His military tactics were a direct reflection of a new, more professional English army. The Anglo-Saxon forces, marching in a cohesive and disciplined manner, arrived at Stamford Bridge and caught the Norwegian army completely by surprise. The Norwegian forces, who had left their armour on their ships, were at a severe disadvantage. The battle itself was a brutal and bloody affair, fought in close quarters on the bridge over the River Derwent. The English army, with its disciplined shield wall formation, was able to hold the bridge against the initial Norwegian charge. The Norwegians, though they fought with ferocity and courage, were no match for the better equipped and more disciplined English forces. The battle ended in a decisive victory for Harold Godwinson. Both Harold Hardrada and Tostig were killed in the fighting, and the remnants of the Norwegian army were forced to retreat back to their ships. The victory at Stamford Bridge was a powerful and symbolic moment, marking the last great Viking invasion of England and the end of Norway's ambitions for a North Sea empire. It was a final, decisive roar from the Viking world, but it was a roar that was met and defeated by the new military and political order that had emerged in England. The twilight of the Viking Age was not a sudden event, but a gradual and complex process of political and cultural change that led to the end of an era of independent raiding and expansion. The raids had not ceased due to military defeat alone, but because the Scandinavian world itself had undergone a fundamental transformation. This shift, which began in the 10th century and was largely complete by the 12th century, was driven by three main factors: the consolidation of royal power, the adoption of Christianity, and the increasing military sophistication of European kingdoms. The consolidation of royal power in Scandinavia was a key driver of the decline in raiding. The numerous independent chieftainships that had defined the early Viking Age were gradually replaced by centralized monarchies in Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. Kings like Harald Fairhair and Harald Bluetooth, through a combination of military conquest and political maneuvering, brought the independent Jarls under their rule. This centralization of power meant that kings could now control their subjects' activities, and they began to outlaw raiding in favor of a new, more organized form of warfare and a focus on trade and internal state building. The adoption of Christianity, as detailed in earlier chapters, also played a crucial role. As the Scandinavian kingdoms converted, they became integrated into the wider political and economic world of Christian Europe. This integration meant that the old pagan justifications for raiding the pursuit of glory in Valhalla were replaced by a new Christian ideology that emphasized peace and stability. The clergy, who were often literate in Latin, also played a key role in the administrative and legal systems of the new Christian monarchies, helping to create a more stable and centralized form of government. The increasing military sophistication of European kingdoms was the third factor that contributed to the end of the Viking Age. The Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, under the leadership of King Alfred, had developed a system of fortified towns and a professional army that was capable of repelling Viking assaults. Similarly, the Frankish kingdoms had developed a feudal system of defense that relied on heavily armored cavalry and the construction of castles. These new military technologies and tactics made raiding a much more dangerous and less profitable enterprise. The days of easy plunder were over. The raids had ceased, but the Viking world lived on. Its enduring legacy was a new political and cultural landscape that had been fundamentally shaped by centuries of Viking expansion and interaction. The end of the Viking Age did not mean the end of the Viking peoples. Rather, it marked a new phase in their history, as the independent raids and settlements of the previous centuries gave way to the consolidation of powerful medieval kingdoms in Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. This period, from the 11th to the 13th centuries, saw the Norse peoples transition from raiders and pirates to the new architects of Northern Europe, building on the foundations of Viking conquest and settlement to create stable Christian monarchies that would play a significant role in European politics and trade. In Denmark, the consolidation of royal power, which had begun under King Harald Bluetooth, was completed by his successors. The Danish monarchy, with its centralized administration and control over the strategic trade routes of the Baltic, became a powerful political force. The establishment of Christian institutions, such as bishoprics and monasteries, provided a new legal and administrative framework, and the Danish kings, now firmly integrated into the European political landscape, began to engage in diplomacy and trade with the other Christian kingdoms. In Norway, the unification of the country, which had been started by Harald Fairhair and continued by Olaf Tryggvason, was solidified under King Olaf Haraldsson, later Saint Olaf. The Norwegian monarchy, though often in a state of conflict with its Danish and Swedish rivals, established a new legal code, a centralized administration, and a Christian church that became a powerful force for social and political unity. The Norwegian kingdom, with its long coastline and its control over the North Atlantic islands, became a major player in European trade, exporting valuable commodities such as dried fish and furs to the markets of the continent. In Sweden, the process of state building was more gradual, but by the 12th century, a unified Swedish kingdom had emerged. The Swedish monarchy, with its base in the trading centres of the Baltic, established a network of fortresses and administrative centres that provided the foundation for a new centralised state. The Swedish kingdom, which was the last of the Scandinavian countries to fully embrace Christianity, also became a powerful force in the Baltic, engaging in military campaigns and trade with the Slavic and Baltic peoples. The Vikings' end, in the end, was not a defeat, but a new beginning. They had not disappeared, but had, in their own unique way, become a part of the very European civilization they had once terrorized, a testament to their adaptability and their enduring political and cultural influence. The lasting legacy of Viking expansion was not just political or economic, but also linguistic, an enduring imprint that fundamentally shaped the languages and legal traditions of Northern Europe. This linguistic impact was most profound on the English language, where the centuries of contact with Scandinavian settlers in the Danelaw led to a process of language blending. Old Norse, the language of the Vikings, intermingled with Old English, contributing hundreds of words related to daily life, law, and social structures. The adoption of words like sky, leg, egg, give, and take from Old Norse demonstrates a deep level of integration in the everyday vocabulary of the English people. The linguistic legacy of Old Norse is not limited to vocabulary. The language also influenced English grammar and syntax, leading to the use of more complex sentence structures and the introduction of new grammatical forms. The influence of the Vikings on English place names is also a clear and lasting legacy. The thousands of place names in eastern and northern England ending in by farm, Thorpe village, and Thwaite clearing are a permanent record of the Viking settlement and their agricultural practices. This linguistic heritage is a testament to the fact that the Viking presence was not a fleeting moment of violence, but a sustained and deep-seated cultural interaction. In Iceland, the legacy of Old Norse took a different path. Due to the island's geographical isolation and the lack of a strong foreign influence, the Old Norse language was preserved in a form that is still largely intelligible to modern Icelandic speakers. The Icelandic sagas and Eddas, which were written in this language, are a unique and invaluable historical source for the history and mythology of the Viking world. They provide a window into the pagan beliefs, social structures, and heroic ideals of a culture that has long since vanished on the European mainland. The sagas, therefore, are not just a literary tradition, but a living monument to the linguistic and cultural legacy of the Vikings. The linguistic impact of the Vikings also extended to the development of the distinct Scandinavian languages of Danish, Swedish, and Norwegian. These languages, which all have their roots in Old Norse, evolved in their own unique ways, but they still retain a shared vocabulary and grammatical structure. The unification of Norway and Denmark under Christian monarchies also led to the adoption of a new, more formalized legal and administrative vocabulary, which was often borrowed from Latin or continental European languages. However, the foundational elements of the Scandinavian languagesta vocabulary, syntax, and grammar remain a direct legacy of the Viking Age. The Vikings' lasting legacy, in the end, was not just in the kingdoms they conquered or the wealth they plundered, but in the enduring power of their language, which continues to shape the culture and identity of Northern Europe. The political institutions of the Viking world, with their emphasis on popular assemblies and legal codes, left a lasting imprint on European legal and governmental systems. This legacy is a testament to the fact that Viking society was not a lawless chaos, but a complex and highly structured social order that valued communal decision-making and justice. The core of this system was the Thing, a popular assembly where free men gathered to settle disputes, make laws, and elect leaders. This tradition of local governance, based on a form of direct democracy, was a powerful and enduring legacy that would influence the political systems of the regions the Vikings settled. In England, the Norse settlers in the Danelaw introduced their own legal and administrative practices, which blended with existing Anglo-Saxon customs. The Viking tradition of the wapentake, a local assembly where legal disputes were settled and laws were administered, became a new unit of local governance. The influence of Norse legal concepts is also evident in the English legal system. The concepts of compensation rather than retribution, and the use of a jury of peers to determine the facts of a case, are believed to have been introduced to England by the Norse settlers. These legal principles, which were a direct reflection of the Viking tradition of the Thing, were a significant contribution to the development of English common law. The Viking influence on law and governance was also evident in the Scottish Highlands and Islands. The Norse settlers, who had established powerful chieftainships in these areas, introduced their own legal codes and administrative systems. These new political structures, which were often based on the principle of personal loyalty and military service, replaced the more decentralized systems of the native Pictish and Gaelic peoples. The presence of these Norse-influenced legal and political institutions in the Scottish Highlands and Islands persisted for centuries, a testament to the enduring legacy of Viking settlement. The Viking tradition of the Thing also had a lasting impact on the legal systems of the Scandinavian countries. The Icelandic Althing, a national parliament where laws were made and legal disputes were settled, is a direct continuation of this tradition. The Norwegian and Danish legal systems, while they were eventually centralized under Christian monarchies, also retained many of the principles of the early Viking legal codes. The echoes of Viking law and governance, in the end, can be found not just in the place names and legal vocabulary of Northern Europe, but in the very political structures that govern these countries today. The Norsemen, through their voyages to the Mediterranean Sea, extended the global reach of the Viking world, establishing a powerful and enduring kingdom in southern Italy and Sicily. These warriors, who came to be known as the Normans, were descendants of the Viking settlers who had been granted land in northern France by the Frankish king Charles the Simple. By the early 11th century, a new wave of Norman adventurers, driven by ambition and a desire for wealth and land, began to travel to southern Italy, initially as mercenaries in the service of local lords. These early Norman mercenaries, with their superior military prowess and disciplined cavalry tactics, quickly distinguished themselves in the fragmented political landscape of southern Italy. The region was a complex mix of Byzantine, Lombard, and Arab territories, which were in a constant state of political and military conflict. The Normans, initially hired to fight for one ruler against another, soon realized that they could seize power for themselves. Led by ambitious figures from families like the Hottervilles, they began to systematically conquer and consolidate their own territories, defeating both Byzantine and Arab armies. The conquest of southern Italy and Sicily was a remarkable military and political achievement. Robert Guiscard, a member of the Hauteville family, consolidated Norman rule over southern Italy, establishing a powerful duchy that challenged the authority of the Byzantine Empire and the papacy. His brother, Roger I, went on to conquer the island of Sicily from its Arab rulers in a series of protracted military campaigns. The Normans, a small group of warriors in a foreign land, had, through a combination of military skill, political cunning, and adaptability, established a powerful and culturally rich kingdom in one of the most historically significant regions of the world. The Norman kingdom of southern Italy and Sicily was a unique cultural synthesis that blended Norman, Byzantine, Arab, and Italian traditions. The Normans, though a warrior elite, were a remarkably tolerant and pragmatic people. They allowed the local populations to continue to practice their own religions and to use their own legal codes. This cultural blending is most evident in the architecture, art, and administrative systems of the kingdom. Norman churches were built with Byzantine mosaics and Islamic-influenced decorations, and the royal court was a trilingual, multicultural centre of learning and diplomacy. The Normans' conquest of southern Italy and Sicily, in the end, was a testament to the enduring legacy of Viking expansion, a historical event that brought the Norse world to the heart of the Mediterranean and created a powerful and culturally rich kingdom that would play a significant role in medieval European history. The final chapter of the Varangian Guard's story is a testament to the unit's enduring legacy and its transformation in the face of changing political realities. While the Guard had its origins in Norse and other northern warriors, its composition changed dramatically after the Norman conquest of England in 1066 CE. The Norman victory at the Battle of Hastings led to a mass exodus of Anglo-Saxon nobles and warriors who were unwilling to submit to the new Norman rule. These Anglo-Saxon exiles, with their long-standing reputation as elite warriors, sought their fortune in the Byzantine Empire and were quickly incorporated into the Varangian Guard. This infusion of Anglo-Saxon warriors, who were referred to as the English by Byzantine chroniclers, transformed the Guard, and for a period it became a predominantly Anglo-Saxon force. The presence of the English in the Guard is a direct link between the end of the Anglo-Saxon era and the continuation of a military unit that had its origins in the Viking world. These Anglo-Saxon exiles, many of whom had fought with Harold Godwinson at the Battle of Hastings, brought with them their own martial traditions and a deep-seated hatred for the Normans. They continued to serve the Byzantine emperors with the same unwavering loyalty that had defined the Guard's Norse founders. This loyalty was a key reason why the Guard was so valued by the emperors, as it provided a bodyguard that was free from the intrigues and political conflicts of the Byzantine court. The English-dominated Guard continued to fight on the battlefields of the Byzantine Empire, from the Balkans to Anatolia, defending the emperor and the empire from its numerous enemies. However, the Guard's final years were marked by a decline in both its political influence and its military effectiveness. As the Byzantine Empire itself began to fragment and decline in the late Middle Ages, the Guard's importance diminished. By the 14th century, the Guard had largely been dissolved, its members either assimilated into the Byzantine population or returned to their homelands. The legacy of the Varangian Guard, in the end, was a complex one. It was a bridge between the northern world and the Byzantine Empire, a conduit for both military technology and cultural exchange. The Guard's martial traditions and cultural influence also had a lasting impact on Byzantine culture, with Norsemen becoming an integral part of the imperial court. The Varangian Guard's vow of loyalty to the emperor, in the end, was a powerful symbol of a new era of Viking activity, one that moved beyond simple raiding and settlement to a role as a key player in the political and military affairs of the medieval world. The conversion of the Viking world to Christianity was a profound and lasting cultural transformation that fundamentally reshaped Scandinavia and its relationship with the rest of Europe. This process, which was largely complete by the 11th century, was not a sudden event, but a slow transition that was driven by a complex mix of political, economic, and religious motivations. The establishment of new Christian institutions, such as bishoprics and monasteries, played a crucial role in this transition, providing a new framework for law, governance, and social order. Christian missions, often sponsored by the Frankish and Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, had been active in Scandinavia since the 9th century, but their early successes were limited. However, as the Viking raids brought Norse leaders into direct contact with the Christian world, they began to recognize the political advantages of the new faith. For kings like Harald Bluetooth of Denmark, conversion was a strategic move that allowed him to integrate his kingdom into the broader political landscape of Christian Europe. Christianity provided a common language of diplomacy and a new ideological basis for centralized royal authority, which was essential for a ruler who was trying to unify a fragmented society. The transition was often violent, as new Christian kings used force to suppress the old pagan religion. The sagas, particularly those of Norway, chronicle a series of battles and conflicts between Christian kings and pagan chieftains. The struggle was not just a religious one, it was a battle for political control, as the new faith provided a powerful ideological justification for the centralization of power. The establishment of a Christian church, with its hierarchical structure and administrative efficiency, gave the kings a new tool for state building that was far more effective than the decentralized pagan system. The adoption of Christianity also led to the creation of a new religious art and literary tradition that blended Norse and Christian elements. The Viking art styles, with their intricate animal motifs and interlaced patterns, were adapted to Christian themes, as seen on the carved stone crosses and church decorations of the period. This cultural synthesis, which is evident in the transition from the pagan gelling style to the more Christian-influenced Ringerike and Ernest styles, demonstrates a gradual cultural change that was happening alongside the political transformation. The unifying power of Christianity, in the end, was a crucial factor in the end of the Viking Age, as an era of independent raiding and expansion. It provided a new social and political order, a new cultural identity, and a new role for the Scandinavian kingdoms in the medieval world. The end of the Viking Age was not a sudden event, but a fundamental shift in worldview that led the Viking peoples to abandon their nomadic, seafaring lifestyle in favor of sedentary agricultural communities. This transition was a complex process of assimilation that was driven by a combination of economic, political, and cultural factors, both voluntary and forced. It marked the end of an era defined by raiding and expansion, and the beginning of a new phase of state building and integration into the wider European political landscape. Economically, the early Viking raids had been highly profitable, providing a source of wealth and prestige for ambitious chieftains and warriors. However, by the late 10th and 11th centuries, the profitability of raiding began to decline. The Anglo-Saxon and Frankish kingdoms had developed more sophisticated military and defensive systems, including fortified towns and professional armies, which made hit-and-run raids a much riskier and less lucrative enterprise. The raids, which had once been a source of immense wealth, became a dangerous and often unsuccessful business. This economic reality forced many Vikings to seek new forms of income and to focus on more stable, long-term economic activities, such as trade and agriculture. Politically, the consolidation of royal power in Scandinavia was a key factor in the end of the nomadic mindset. The numerous independent chieftainships that had defined the early Viking Age were gradually replaced by centralized monarchies in Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. Kings like Harald Fairhair and Canute the Great, through a combination of military conquest and political maneuvering, brought the independent Jarls under their rule. These new monarchies, in turn, began to outlaw raiding and to encourage their subjects to focus on agriculture and trade. The establishment of a new, centralized legal and administrative system also provided a more stable and secure environment for a sedentary agricultural society to flourish. Culturally, the adoption of Christianity played a crucial role in this transformation. The new Christian faith, with its emphasis on peace, stability, and a new ethical framework, was fundamentally incompatible with the pagan warrior culture of the early Viking Age. The old pagan justifications for raiding and a glorious death in battle were replaced by a new Christian ideology that valued a settled, pious life. The establishment of Christian institutions, such as churches and monasteries, provided a new social and cultural center for communities, and the Christian clergy, with their new administrative and legal expertise, played a key role in the governance of the new Christian kingdoms. The shift from the nomadic mindset, in the end, was a profound cultural transformation that was driven by a complex interplay of economic, political, and religious factors. It marked the end of a legendary era of raiding and expansion, but it was also the birth of a new medieval Scandinavia, a society that would become a new and powerful force in European history. The study of Viking history provides crucial insights into the processes of cultural transformation, political fragmentation, and demographic change that characterize the transition from ancient to medieval Europe. The story of the Vikings, in essence, is a demonstration of the complex interactions between environmental factors, political organization, and military technology that determine the success or failure of a people. Their rise was fueled by an innovative naval technology and a warrior culture that was perfectly suited for a fragmented, vulnerable Europe. Their ultimate assimilation into sedentary civilizations, however, illustrates the long-term advantages of agricultural and urban societies over their more mobile alternatives. The Viking Age, in its initial phase, was a powerful force for political fragmentation in Europe. Their decentralized raids and conquests dismantled kingdoms and disrupted trade routes, contributing to the collapse of the Carolingian Empire and the decline of Anglo-Saxon power. However, in the long term, the Viking presence also acted as a catalyst for political consolidation. The need to defend against Viking attacks forced European kingdoms to develop more sophisticated military and administrative systems, leading to the emergence of centralized monarchies in England and France. Similarly, in Scandinavia, the Viking diaspora and the wealth accumulated from trade and tribute provided the foundational elements for the creation of stable, medieval kingdoms in Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. The cultural contributions of the Vikings were equally profound, demonstrating the enriching effects of cultural contact and synthesis. The Norse settlers in the Danelaw, for example, introduced a new vocabulary and legal traditions that would permanently alter the English language and legal system. The Hiberno-Norse kingdoms of Ireland blended Norse and Gaelic traditions to create a new cosmopolitan culture. The Ruses in Eastern Europe, who were of Swedish Viking descent, provided the leadership that led to the founding of a new kingdom that would become a major force in the region. The Vikings, in the end, were not just destroyers, but also creators, whose raids and settlements introduced new ideas, technologies, and social structures to the societies they encountered. The twilight of the Viking kingdoms marked not merely the end of a particular group of Germanic peoples, but the conclusion of the great age of barbarian kingdoms that had transformed the Roman world into the foundation of medieval Europe. The Vikings, in their own unique way, were the last of these great migrating peoples, and their story is a powerful and enduring legacy of a historical transition. Their rise and fall is a testament to a people whose ambition and adaptability reshaped the political and cultural landscape of a continent, leaving an imprint that would endure for centuries to come.